Welcome to Week 3, Session 5 on Subjectivism and Idealism. Today we'll have an introduction. We'll cover what is subjectivism, some objections to subjectivism, the concept of idealism, as well as game theory, and some final tips and takeaways. What is subjectivism? Well, it's an ethical system, and we're going to get into just what that means in some detail here. But first, let's see why we need subjectivism. You will remember last week when we discussed cultural relativism, CR for short, that good meant whatever is socially acceptable in my culture. But there were certain problems with cultural relativism. First of all, it was very difficult to define my culture because cultures overlap and they don't just start and stop cleanly at the border. There's different cultures in different states and even different cultures in the state of West Virginia. So there's a lot of overlap. There are contradictions with socially acceptable ideas between our cultures and other cultures. Some things which are perfectly acceptable in Saudi Arabia are not acceptable in America, for example. And we saw that cultures can be clearly wrong. There are some cultures which still, even today, practice widespread racism. There are other cultures where there's infanticide and murder are quite acceptable and are encouraged in some aspects. So how do we fix this? How do we come up with a better system that deals with this culture problem? Well, one suggested solution to the problem of cultural relativism and the messiness of defining culture and such was the idea of subjectivism. Subjectivism has three core tenets. The first one is good actually is another way of saying I like it. In other words, there really is no absolute good. It's just what I happen to like. Well, subjectivism is seen by its proponents to allow us the freedom to decide our own personal ethics. I like it, you may not like it. That's okay. And the third point is our ethical values often evolve and improve over the time, so the meaning of good can change as we mature. Things that we thought were not good when we were much younger, we now think are good, and things that we thought were good, we now think are bad. That's okay, according to the subjectivist. Subjectivism argues heavily that black and white ethical rules are really just something for kids. We adults live in a gray world. For example, as far as things changing over time, we tell a preschool child, never ever cross the street. But when they get to be about 6 or 7 years old, we say you cross the street when you wait for the walk sign and cross at the crosswalk. When they get to be about 12 or 13, we say you can cross in the middle of the street, but look both ways and watch for cars. We don't give instruction like this to adults. We let the adult cross cautiously or run stupidly across the street, doing what they wish. The ethical rules have relaxed. In another example, we tell children, don't drink, ever. But when someone turns 18 years old, we often tell them, it's okay to drink, but drink responsibly, and above all, don't drink and drive. And then when someone's a full adult, maybe in their 30s or 40s, we give them the information that drinking causes colon cancer and liver cirrhosis. But we also tell the adult, you can decide. And some people decide to drink and others don't. We relax the ethical rules, and therefore you get the idea that the ethical rules depend upon the person. That's what the subjectivist argues. Ethical rules are my choice. We're going to have a few questions here. If we were in class, we would have a discussion in our groups. But since we're doing remote learning and we can't discuss it face to face, you may have to just think about these things or discuss it with somebody who's close by. Our first question is drinking alcohol good or bad? Determine your idea on that, and while you're doing that, pause the tape. Now I'd like you, as a second question, to consider the possibility that drinking alcohol is good for some people and bad for other people. Stop the video and ask yourself, which people is it good for and which people is it bad for, or is it always good or always bad? Now a slightly different type of question. How do we judge people? How do we judge the goodness and badness of people based upon their usage of alcohol? I'll give you an example. When my daughter came home from 5th grade, having been through the DARE program, she was absolutely aghast when she saw someone who was having a glass of wine out at a restaurant. She said, that person's an alcoholic. Well, you know, she was in 5th grade, very young. But how do you look at people based upon their usage of alcohol? What makes you think perhaps that they're not so good or they're good based upon whether or not they drink? Now, one evening, you're out at Applebee's, and you know that Jim is a pastor. People have told you that Jim is a church pastor. You see him drink a single glass of wine one evening at Applebee's. What does this do to your thoughts of Jim? What do you think of Jim if he is a pastor and he is drinking wine? Now you later discover that Jim is a Catholic priest. Does this change your opinion of him having an occasional glass of wine, as opposed to when you thought that perhaps he was a Baptist or Church of Christ pastor? Why? I want you to notice that we use different yardsticks to judge people's goodness and badness. We believe that different people should be held to different ethical standards or behavioral standards. Consider that. Consider where in your life you judge people and their actions differently based upon what you know about their profession or their background. The subjectivist, once again, argues that black and white ethical rules are for kids, but adults live in a gray world. We also, as a subjectivist, might accept that I can like things that are generally considered bad, such as smoking, but I choose to smoke. I know it's bad for me, but I choose to smoke. That's what a subjectivist might say. It says, in general, that the subjectivist will like short-term results, but recognize that certain bad things can harm in the long term. All sorts of actions have this, and it's recognized by the subjectivist. The subjectivist will also say what's good for me may be bad for you. For example, Bill may be able to take 2 drinks and stop, but Sarah can't stop until she passes out. You may be able to have a couple of beers and everyone is happy. But if your pastor has a glass of wine, it's likely he'll be fired if word gets out. So the subjectivist looks at this and says, nothing is objectively good or bad. It all depends upon the person. So what do you think of this subjectivism as a system of ethics? Does it make sense? Does it explain the way ethics really works? And what are the advantages and the objections to subjectivism as a system of ethics? Go ahead and stop the video for a moment and think about these. Now, subjectivism, again, says that I am the decider of what is ethical. Each person decides what is ethical in their own mind. But the question comes up, if you like something that hurts other people, is this still good? What do you think? A few years ago, a woman named Rita Mays was discovered to have apparently injected insulin into old veterans at the Veterans Hospital in Clarksburg, West Virginia. At least a half dozen men died this way. They didn't have diabetes. Rita just decided that she did not want them around for one reason or another. Sometimes it was because she was trying to put them out of their misery, and sometimes it was just because they had done something that she did not like. She hurt other people, but she thought what she was doing in these cases was ethical. Is this good or not? Subjectivism, there's still other objections that have come up to it. For example, if what I like today is what is ethical, what happens when my likes change from day to day? Does that mean that good also changes, what we define as good? You may remember hearing about George III of England. He was the King of England when we decided as a country to leave England and write the Declaration of Independence. He's been described as Mad King George because he had a mental illness. His likes changed from day to day. As an extreme, this wasn't exactly what happened, but as an extreme, he might come in one day and say, anyone who's wearing green today will get rewarded. And then the next day come in and say, why is everybody wearing green? Anybody wearing green is banned from a court. It's an extreme, but it's happened. And then you have yourself. The things you like have changed as you have grown older. There were things that you really liked when you were 12 or 17 that today you don't like. And there were things that you hated, perhaps broccoli, when you were 10, that you like today. Does that mean that good changed? Broccoli changed from being bad to good? What's going on here? This is an objection that is put against subjectivism. So some people argue that subjectivism appears to be simply a design your own ethics system. There's no idea really of what is good except what I like. And somehow that bothers us because what I like, you may not like. And so that seems like a real recipe for trouble. We have that problem again of the evil king. The king changes his mind daily about what's good and what's bad. Some people are good today and some people are bad tomorrow, according to the king, and he has the power. So what if you don't have the power? What's ethical here? What's the right thing to do? Subjectivism, as you see, can create a lot of uncertainty in our life. The biggest problem, of course, is who decides what is good and bad legally if ethics is truly subjective? If every person can just say, I did it because I thought it was right, and go and kill a bunch of people, doesn't that bother us? And doesn't it lead to true anarchy? Just a world where violence and theft and all sorts of things are justified because I like it. So because of this, perhaps feelings alone, my feelings, are inadequate for ethical decisions. Maybe we need some basis of rational thought to have a place when we're making ethical decisions. We need some way to determine what is right and wrong, which is more stable than my particular feelings and your particular feelings today. So many people began to think, because subjectivism relies too much on my personal feelings and whims, we need another system which is less personal and more logical, less feeling-based, and thus more stable, not subject to change on a daily or even hourly basis. The ancient Greek philosophers, in particular Plato, began to talk about the ideal world. The ideal world is like this perfect triangle. You may remember back in geometry class that a perfect triangle has exactly 180 degrees. But one of the things we know is none of us can draw a perfect triangle or a perfect circle. Even computer-drawn triangles or circles are not perfect. They may have 179.9999 degrees, or the circle may be almost exactly a perfect circle, but it's never exactly a perfect circle. Well, Plato said, but somewhere there's this idea of the perfect triangle and the perfect circle. There's also this idea of the perfect dog or the perfect cat, the perfect man, the perfect woman, the perfect life, and the perfect ethical system. So our goal as an ethical person is to approach this through thought. Thinking about it, try to get as close to the perfect as we can. One way people have tried this is through a branch of mathematics called game theory. That's where reason is applied to ethical problems. Game theory is the modern branch of mathematics that studies the best strategy to use in situations. It really began to grow in the 1940s. There is a movie made about a man named John Nash. He was a student from Bluefield, West Virginia. John went to Princeton when he was a senior in high school, and he graduated when he was age 20 with both a bachelor's and a master's degree in mathematics. There's a movie made about John. It's called A Beautiful Mind. There was also a book written about him. John Nash was perhaps one of the leading founders and developers of game theory. It's said that when he showed up at Princeton, he was somewhat scatterbrained and somewhat, he didn't have his act all together. So one day he arrives at class late. Well, the professor had just put on the board the 10 biggest unsolved problems in game theory. That was on a Friday. John quickly scribbled them down because class was finishing, and he went home. On Monday, he shows up back at class, and he looks terrible. Clearly, he hasn't slept, ate, taken a shower, nothing. He comes in and he says, I don't understand. I just couldn't get them done. You know, I'm usually a good student, but I could not solve 3 of those problems. He truly had solved 7 of the greatest unsolved problems in game theory that weekend. In any event, game theory's basic question is, given a certain situation, how should we act? Sometimes there's one best course of action, but more often our best course of action depends on the assumptions we make about another player. For example, the best move in checkers and chess is not the same depending upon who you're playing with. The best move in football is not the same depending upon who you're playing against. What will they do if we do this? For example, let's just say that the Boston, the New England Patriots line up with a 5-4 defense. What's the best offense that should be brought up to the line? It depends. If they line up with a different defense, then you'll put a different offense on the line. The quarterback will change things. So game theory studies the best move in all sorts of games and negotiations and even warfare. Here's an example problem that's very famous from game theory. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. You and your buddy, or just a random person, are cellmates in jail. You and him come up with an escape plan. Now you know this escape plan isn't going to be perfect. No escape plan ever is. So the question is, should you snitch on your cellmate or not? If you tell, you get a reward, and he gets harsh punishment. But if he tells, you're the one that gets harsh punishment, and he gets the reward. But if neither of you tell, you get a pretty light punishment. If both of you tell, you both get modest punishment. So what should you do? Should you tell about the plan or not? Game theory tells you how to analyze that based upon how harsh the punishment is and how good the reward is. So game theory is one movement that takes us toward idealism. Idealism says, if we knew everything and we cared equally for everyone, ethically, this is what we should do. And therefore, the idealist says you should become very informed and you should stay impartial. Instead of worrying about your feelings about what is right and wrong, you should become more like an ethical computer. Yet, idealism also knows that feelings are a clue to rightness because they somehow lift deep knowledge up to our reason. We want to reason through things. We want to use all the knowledge we possibly can, and we want to treat everybody equally. And that's what we want to do, but we also recognize that feelings can provide valuable information. When it doesn't feel right, we probably shouldn't be doing it, or at least we should really investigate it carefully. You see, feelings and stereotypes are shortcuts that have evolved with us to facilitate quick action that's usually right. Studies have shown that a lot of stereotypes are about 70 to 80% right. That means you can often go wrong, but most of the time you'll be right, at least to a certain extent. So when we can, we need to have our feelings subject to our rational thought and our logic, particularly when we're making ethical decisions. And therefore, we should take the time to learn everything we can about the situation, to analyze it, in other words, to think it through. But it also says in idealism that all people should have equal value in our analysis. And that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? It gets us away from the subjectivism of I feel this or you feel that. So what are we going to do? Flip a coin? Game theory was one way that we would approach this and try to make it more rational. Plato and his ideal world was always trying to get to what is the ideal. So theoretically, idealism gives us the best answer through a combination of our feelings that point us to issues that we need to consider, an appreciation of the value of each person, considering each person to be very valuable, and then logic and analysis finding the best way. But there are problems with idealism. Even idealism. Idealism, if you follow through, it leads us to the concept of acceptable casualties. Yes, we need to bomb the place, and there'll be 5 civilians killed in the surrounding block. We can do that because that's the best answer, we think. Another problem with idealism is because it requires us to really work through the logic and analysis, it can't react quickly. If you're going to really try to get all the information and study everything carefully, there's a cost to that. There's a cost in the amount of time it takes to analyze it, the amount of time it takes to gather the information, and time, as you know, is money. Somebody has to be paid to do this. We have to take time from our life to work out all this. And then we have this problem that we never have all the data. If you think back to our time during COVID, the data about COVID and how it was spread kept changing as we investigated deeper and deeper. At first, we thought that the main way that COVID would spread, because it was the main way that other viruses had spread, was through little bits of, snot and spit and such that ended up on door handles and things like that. And so we were very carefully telling people, be cautious when you're handling things. We went to no touch on a lot of things. But then later on we discovered that the way it really spread was through tiny droplets spread through the air. And so now we started talking about social distancing and wearing masks. And this confused people. But the reality was they were giving us the best data they had at the time they had it. So we never have all the data. The final thing that's a problem with idealism is impartiality towards people often sets up a question similar to this. Imagine that you are trying to make an ethical decision at an aluminum plant about who you lay off. Do you lay off the brilliant but expensive Nobel Prize winning metallurgist who may develop a brand new metal in the next year or two? Or do you lay off 3 young so-so electrician apprentices to save money? In the medical field, do you give the transplant to the brilliant young Nobel Prize winning biologist, or do you give the transplants and the treatment to 5 elderly Alzheimer's patients? If you're treating people impartially, well, you would help the 5 Alzheimer's patients, right? But there's always other things involved in these decisions because people aren't numbers, they're not robots, they're not interchangeable, they are people. So to sum things up, some final tips and takeaways. Subjectivism emphasizes how I feel about an ethical question. Idealism emphasizes finding the perfect answer. But unfortunately, there is rarely a perfect answer. And we rarely have the information to get a perfect answer if one existed. Now on Thursday, we're going to be studying supernaturalism along with atheism and the ethics of that. On February the 3rd, we will have quiz number 2 on subjectivism and idealism. Our quiz will be moved, our quiz number 1, which is on classic ethics and cultural relativism and honor and shame, that will be moved to Thursday, assuming we have class then, because we can't have class in person. It will occur at the end of the class period. Okay, thank you. If you've got any questions, feel free to email me. Bye.